I'll call this meeting to order. The Polk County Board of Commissioners. Today's Wednesday, October 11th. Commissioner Pope and Commissioner Gordon are in the room, and Commissioner Morthorse has joined us via Zoom. Let's see. First up on the agenda are comments for any items not on the agenda. Would anybody like to address the board at this time? Next up is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
I'll second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Next up is approval of the minutes from October 4th. Do we have a motion to approve?
Also move.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Next up is approval of the consent calendar. Items A through D are listed on the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar as presented?
So moved.
I'll second that.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Okay, next up is deliberation on legislative amendment 23-02, text amendments to the county's zoning ordinance, chapter 136. Eric, please join us.
Morning, my name is Eric Knudsen. I'm the Associate Planner for Polk County's Community Development Department. I'm here today to discuss Planning File LA 2302, which is legislative amendment proposal to update the text of Polk County zoning ordinance, chapter 136, which pertains to the exclusive farm use zoning district. A public hearing was held before the Board of Commissioners on September 6, 2023. At the public hearing, the board moved to leave the record open for additional written comments until September 20th, 2023 at 5 p.m. During the open record period, staff received 2 additional comments. On October 3rd, 2023, staff provided a staff memorandum to the board that includes proposed text amendments to chapter 136 and all written comments as attachments. As discussed in the memo, staff asked that the board deliberate on the record and the public comments received and recommends that the board move to adopt the proposed text amendments to Polk County zoning ordinance chapter 136 as included as attachment A in the staff report. The deliberation options for the board are included on page 3 of staff memorandum. Thanks.
Yeah. We'll now open it up to deliberations.
I will move to adopt the staff recommendations for 2302.
I'll second that.
A motion's been made and seconded to adopt the amendments. Any further discussion or questions for staff? Hearing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Motion carries unanimously. Great work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have the first reading of an ordinance concerning construction, erosion, sediment control, and post-construction runoff control. Mr. Smith will lead us off, and Kayla's in the room for any questions.
Good morning, Commissioners. So this is the first reading of what we intend to be ordinance 23-02, which is the enactment of a new chapter to our Polk County Code of Ordinances, which is chapter 61 concerning the construction, erosion and sediment, and then runoff control. This is the first reading of the ordinance. There's nothing to adopt today. I will describe the essence of it just for background for the commissioners and for the public listening, but don't anticipate reading the entire text of it unless the board would choose for me to do so. And then if there's no major hiccups with this, we anticipate a second reading and adoption on October 25th. So the background for this ordinance change is its requirement for the county's MS4 permit that we hold for the stormwater system, and it's applicable simply to development within the urban growth boundary of outside of the city of Salem. So a relatively small area of the county is affected by this. The ordinance itself, the chapter 61, contains 2 basic parts. One is for construction, erosion, and sediment control, so activities during active construction, and then a second section for post-construction runoff control and stormwater maintenance. For the construction erosion permits, a permit is going to be required for any development that will disturb more than a 1/4 acre of land. So it's not necessarily the size of the parcel, it's the actual disruption of over a 1/4 of an acre. So decent sized developments. And then that will require a permit for erosion control prevention and sediment control plan, which will be required from an applicant. And then inspections may occur during construction to ensure compliance with the plan that's been provided to us. We have adopted, or we're essentially incorporated by reference Salem's design standards for this because it's in the outskirts of Salem with the anticipation that they'll someday be annexed into Salem. So it keeps everything kind of uniform and we don't have to develop our own standards simply for the UGB of Salem. That's the basic for the construction erosion permit. I believe workflow is anticipated that building permits are going to go through, permitting process is going to go through community development in the event that a construction erosion and sediment control permit and plan is required. They will be referred over to Public Works who will work on that portion of it. And then the second part of the ordinance is involving post-construction runoff control, which is essentially stormwater system maintenance. Some developments will require a drainage permit or a stormwater drainage permit, which requires an operation and maintenance manual designed primarily for larger construction projects. County will maintain facilities for residential developments with some kind of requirements within the ordinance for some easements that allow us to have maintenance access and make that process go a little bit smoother. And then the remainder of the section is dedicated to violations of remedies or for violation remedies. With a pretty similar process to what we've already done many times for like road hazard abatements, which is notice of a violation, an opportunity to cure. If no cure is made, we have the opportunity to abate it ourselves and assess costs with an ability for the alleged violator to have a hearing before a hearings officer. So that is the basics. I'm happy to entertain any questions. Hopefully I have answers for them today. If not, I will be able to get them to you in the next week before any second reading and any changes you guys might want to see in it.
I have a quick question to start us off. With the notice of the violation, the county will state by date certain when the property owner must correct the violation in a manner acceptable to the director. I assume that's the Public Works Director.
It's the Public Works Director or his designee.
Okay, and I'm just curious if an applicant wants to contest that timeline, could they do that before a public hearings officer as well, or do they just address the nature of the violation at that?
You can address two things before a hearings officer, but the nature of the violation itself, and then you can contest the charges that have been assessed by the county if the county itself went in to abate the hazard. So there's two components that can be contested before a hearings officer. And if there was a situation where an individual alleged they didn't have enough time to remedy it themselves before the county came in to abate it, that would be a function of that would be incorporated into any argument about the reasonableness of the costs assessed against them, or the nature that the cost didn't need to be assessed because they were going to fix it themselves, but weren't given an adequate opportunity.
That's clear. Thank you. That's all I have for now. Any other questions or comments? Well, that concludes the first.
I was giving respect to Commissioner Morhorse first,
Yes.
but I don't hear him speaking up. So I have three questions.
Yeah.
First, why are we doing this?
It's a requirement for the permit we hold for the stormwater system maintenance in the urban growth boundary of West.
Okay, it's a requirement. Why?
Because we have a permit for the system that flows from the EPA at the federal level to DEQ at the state level to us. So we're required to have these kind of controls in place for stormwater maintenance.
So we've done this, but this is an update.
Yes, and some of the requirements for the permit have changed with more inspection requirements, and we need better. We're just updating it to have a better kind of remedy system, which is what the permit requires.
Thank you. And what is the benefit to the public?
Benefit to the public is going to be similar to the TMDL things we heard yesterday in our meeting, which is the benefit arguably would be controlling runoff to the water system and the watersheds in the area and making sure that there's less contaminants in those systems.
Okay. And then what is the impact of these updated changes?
The biggest impact will be probably a slightly increased cost to developers as they're going to be required to have a plan approved by the county. So they're going to have to develop the plan on their own. It will require a professional engineer stamp and then be reviewed by the county. There will be a permit fee at the county that the county can develop. We have the ability within this ordinance to incorporate a permit fee within our fee schedule. So we'll have to develop what that cost will be. So it'll be increased cost to any development in the urban growth boundary. But it's hoped with the adoption of the City of Salem standards, most development out there will be relatively familiar with the Salem standards. So it shouldn't be a heavy burden, but it will be an increased burden on development.
And finally, I think this question should always be asked by a government. What are the impacts if we didn't approve it, if we didn't move forward with this?
we'd be out of compliance with our permit. And then we would have to face whatever remedial measures DEQ had for us.
Specific to that stormwater runoff area.
Yes.
Okay. I think that's all I have. I did have, just for the record, so Caitlin and I had a conversation about some of the language in the description, for example, in the 10-page briefing. The descriptive terms are pretty general. So what I don't read in that 10-page summary easily, at least in the beginning of it, I don't see reference specific to this stormwater management area and this UGB specifically. And then when you read in the description that generally it's a blanket statement that any area in Polk County that, I'm paraphrasing, any area in Polk County that where more than a quarter of an acre of dirt is moved, you're required to have this. So and then finally, I said it would be helpful if there was a map in this description as well that showed what our specific action is, where this is taking place. So it's generally easy for people to see at the beginning of this document, this is where we're talking about, and this is the kind of action that we're talking about, just so we don't have any misinterpretation that this was supposed to be some kind of countywide thing.
And I think, yeah, that's a good idea for a better description of the area to which it's applicable. I'm a little hesitant to put a map in the ordinance itself just because the UGB can change.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But we can provide those maps. They're available on our web maps online and things like that. So I think something that points to just that descriptor with a reminder to.
Or just, that's fine. I get that. Or just the descriptor that says the UGB as we know it today. And by that date.
Come on up. Awesome.
I was just gonna say, I would recommend using, referring to the UGB, I would refer to the MS4 permit. And then just reference, just because our MS4 permit will change over time. And so rather than reference the UGB, reference the MS4 permit, which defines the permit area, that's what's gonna change. The UGB gets annexed on a regular basis. And so keep in mind that this is about the MS4 permit, not necessarily the UGB.
Okay. And you see where I'm after though, is that I'm trying to communicate to the public, this is the area that we're talking about.
So what'll happen,
not a county-wide process.
so what'll happen is when someone comes into community development in order to get a permit for development, we're going to calculate the total area that's disturbed. And I think it's important to realize that when we're talking about that area, a standard septic system is 12,000 square feet. Right. So you're already starting to, just by putting a septic system in, starting to encroach in on this new standard. It used to be 1 acre, and we have standards for these stormwater controls on a 1 acre disturbance now. And that has already been adopted into our county code of ordinances. The state changed that standard down to a 1/4 acre. And so we anticipate that we're going to see, based on looking back 5 years on the number of the developments that have occurred within the Salem UGB that we believe disturbed a 1/4 acre or more. It's a little less than 1 per month. And so it's not a lot. And that was really in the buildup pre-COVID when we had a lot more development activity before the interest rates were so high. And so it's actually a little bit lower than that now. So I would, the way that the process works, they'd come into community development. We're going to determine based on the MS4 permit whether they're subject to the stormwater standard or not. And in the planning review, when we identify that, then determine that they are, and determine that they're disturbing 10,000 square feet or more, we're going to refer them to Public Works in order to get that stormwater permit. So the gatekeeping is happening at the time that somebody comes in to do the actual development itself. And so making sure that in the ordinance, we're referring to what those mechanisms are, that it's the MS4 permit, not necessarily the Salem UGB. Because if we said the Salem UGB and the Salem UGB changes and it's not in our new MS, it's on our MS4 permit didn't change. Now all of a sudden we're obligated to apply it somewhere we wouldn't have the regulatory reason to apply it to.
The geographitic area of that MS4 permit is generally.
Today, it is the Salem UGB.
Yeah.
But the Salem UGB can change. And so the only thing that says, I just want to put the emphasis that it's the MS4 permit. And so our MS4 permit is going to change over time.
But to Commissioner Pope's point, this isn't countywide.
This is not countywide.
Thank you.
This is the MS4 permit area, which is triggered by the size of the Salem population. So it's because Salem is over 50,000 people, it's subject to this higher standard of stormwater control. And it's the West Salem that really gets pulled in. And so the DEQ determines what's called the urbanizable area. And they've identified, and we worked in defining the MS4 permit area and keeping that urbanizable area contained to the UGB, which is the actual urbanizable area. It's not necessarily tied to the census blocks, which is, I think, like the easier way to go, and that the federal government uses to kind of determine what the urbanizable area is. So we worked to really turn that into reality with that MS4 permit.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think what he's saying, Kayla's no map. That long about way there, no map. That's fine. And I just want to make certain for the record that the people who elect us, put us here, can look us in the eye and say, why'd you do that? And we just got an explanation for it. So that helps.
Great, good discussion. Thanks for those clarifications. Anything else? So this is the first reading. We'll continue on the second reading on October 25th. Is that
That's what I've intended. Yes, you're.
okay? And any members of the public who'd like to ask questions, please do join us at that meeting. So that concludes regular business. Do we have any need for an executive session today?
No, sir.
All right, with that, we are adjourned.